I've always said the quietest nights on the road are the ones that test a man's soul the hardest. And that night, that freezing, breath-stealing night at the truck stop, began with a sentence that still echoes through me like a slow crack in ice. He locked us out, a boy said it, barely 9 years old, standing alone beside my pump like he'd stepped out of the dark just to hand me his fear. Tell me, what would you do if you found a child shivering under neon lights at 2 in the morning, eyes wide and desperate, staring at you like you were the last safe thing on earth? I smelled diesel first. It always hangs in the air at that hour. Heavy, familiar, grounding. But the cold that night was different. It had a bite to it, a silence that pressed into the skin. My engine had just cut off, ticking softly in the cold, when I noticed a small shape near the pump. At first I thought it was a stray dog or maybe just trash caught in the wind. But then the shape moved, slowly, hesitantly, and stepped into the beam of my headlights. A boy, thin, pale, arms wrapped around himself, trying to hold in whatever warmth he had left. His lips trembled as he spoke, voice small but carrying a weight no child should ever know. He locked us out. The words broke in the middle, like they'd been fighting their way out for too long. I took a step toward him and he flinched. Just barely, but I saw it. That tiny recoil of someone who's learned not everyone walking toward you is coming to help. Hey, I said gently, keeping my voice steady. My name's Rowan. You okay, kid? He shook his head, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes but not falling. My mom's still inside, and he said we can't come back in. A cold heavier than the night settled in my chest. I knelt down slowly, leveling my eyes with his. He looked half frozen, cheeks red from the wind, breath puffing in soft white clouds. What's your name? I asked. He hesitated, then whispered, Caleb. The name cracked through the quiet like a plea. I asked where his mom was, and he pointed with a trembling hand toward the far side of the lot, toward a beat-up SUV parked crookedly beside the convenience store entrance. Its interior lights were off, every door shut, no movement inside. Before I could say another word, a gust of wind swept through the pumps, carrying the metallic scent of cold metal and distant asphalt. Caleb's small shoulders shook, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something that had been creeping behind him long before I got there. I felt the weight of the moment settle onto me, the kind of weight that tells a man he's about to step into something he won't forget. Caleb, I said softly, tell me what happened. The boy swallowed hard, eyes glistening. He got mad, he whispered. He said we were making too much noise. He told us to get out, and then he locked the doors. Mom begged him, but he just drove here and said she could think about it. His voice cracked. Then he went inside and told me not to move. The phrase he told me not to move hit me like a punch to the ribs, not because of the words themselves, but because of how Caleb said them, flat, practiced, like he'd heard commands like that too many times before. 45 seconds hadn't even passed, and I already knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a kid lost at a gas station. This was a cry for help echoing in the cold, and if you're hearing this now, if you're feeling that tension tighten your chest, then hit that like button, because stories like Caleb's, they need to be heard. They remind us that danger doesn't always hide in the dark. Sometimes it stands right under the neon lights. I stood up slowly, keeping my movements calm so I wouldn't scare him further. The wind cut across the lot again, sharp and unfriendly, rattling the loose metal sign above the convenience store. Caleb's eyes followed mine toward the SUV, his breath quickening as though looking at it alone brought the memory back. He's inside? I asked gently. Caleb nodded once. Small, stiff, terrified. He went in there. He said he needed a drink. His gaze shifted toward the store's glass doors where the fluorescent lights flickered under the weight of the quiet night. I scanned the lot. The pumps hummed softly. A few trucks idled at the far end, their engines a distant heartbeat in the cold. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but there was a heaviness in the air, a wrongness, the kind that sinks into your bones before your mind understands why. I leaned down again and pulled off my jacket, draping it around Caleb's shoulders. He tensed at the sudden warmth, then clutched the fabric with small, trembling fingers. We'll figure this out, I told him. Nobody's leaving you out here. The door to the convenience store slid open for a brief second as someone walked out, letting out a puff of warm air that vanished instantly into the night. Caleb flinched at the movement, eyes darting, searching, not for strangers, for him. The boy pressed closer to me without realizing it, as if my presence alone built a wall between him and whatever waited in that store. Is your mom hurt? I asked. His voice cracked when he answered. She was crying. He told her to stop. He said she made him embarrassed. That word, embarrassed, told me more about the man inside than Caleb knew. I'd met his kind before on this road, men who treat control like currency, men who blame everyone but themselves for the wreckage they create, men who think locking someone out in the cold is a form of discipline, not cruelty. The kind of man who walks into a late-night store pretending nothing's wrong while his family shivers outside in the dark. I put a hand on Caleb's shoulder, steady but gentle. "Listen," I said, "you're safe with me. I'm not going anywhere." His eyes met mine, big, frightened, but holding onto hope with a grip stronger than any adult in his situation might have had. He nodded again, this time a little less rigid. It told me he believed me, or wanted to. Sometimes that's all a kid needs to stay upright. Then, just as I was about to guide him toward my truck, something caught my eye through the store's glass. A man near the counter, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark flannel jacket, his posture stiff, head tilted just enough to be watching us from behind the rows of soda coolers. He wasn't pretending to browse. He wasn't paying. He was just standing there staring out at the pumps with a stillness that didn't belong in a place so brightly lit. Caleb saw the direction of my gaze and went rigid again. "That's him," he whispered, voice thin as paper. "That's Royce." The name hit the air like frost. Royce Halden didn't move, not an inch. He stood inside that bright convenience store like a shadow wearing a man's shape, eyes fixed on the pumps as if he could burn holes through the glass just by staring long enough. His jaw worked slowly, like he was chewing on anger he'd been feeding for years. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed faintly, flickering against his silhouette. And even from where I stood, I could feel it, the kind of intensity that doesn't explode, but simmers. The kind that makes a kid like Caleb flinch at a glance. Caleb pressed himself against my side, almost hiding behind my leg. "Please don't let him see me," he whispered, voice barely holding together. I shifted slightly, positioning myself between the boy and Royce's line of sight. "You're okay?" I murmured. "He's not touching you." But my eyes never left the man inside. It wasn't the way he stared that bothered me. It was the way he didn't look at anyone else. The cashier spoke to him. Twice, but he didn't turn, didn't acknowledge, didn't blink. He was waiting for something, or someone, and now I had a sickening feeling that someone was Caleb. The store's sliding doors hissed open again as a trucker stepped inside, letting out another rush of warm air. The sudden movement snapped Royce out of his stillness. His eyes narrowed, focusing sharper, colder. Then his gaze drifted past the glass, slowly, deliberately. I didn't know if he'd spotted Caleb yet, but the way his head turned, the way his shoulders pulled back, it was only a matter of time. I tightened my grip on the boy's shoulder, grounding him in place. "Look at me, Caleb," I said softly. "Right here." He tried. He really did. But fear pulled his gaze back toward the man inside. I could have marched into that store right then and confronted him. But something stopped me. Something in the way Royce stood there calculating his moment. It wasn't drunken rage or blind aggression. It was controlled, intentional. Men like that don't lash out randomly. They choose their timing, their audience, their leverage. And if I approached him too soon, he'd have the upper hand. I needed to know more. I needed to know what June, Caleb's mother, was doing in that SUV, why she wasn't out here, why she hadn't run. Fear makes people freeze, but something about this situation didn't fit the usual mold. "Caleb," I whispered, "where's your mom now?" His throat bobbed with a painful swallow. "She's in the car, but she can't get out." The words dragged across his tongue like he hated them. I felt a coldness deeper than the night settle into my bones. "Did he lock her in?" Caleb didn't speak. He just nodded, tiny, frightened. A gesture so small, it hurt to see. The thought of a woman trapped inside that SUV with a man like that controlling the key, it made something inside me tighten hard. A shadow moved inside the store. Royce stepped away from the counter and started toward the doors. Caleb's breath hitched. "He's coming," the boy whispered, voice a thin thread ready to snap. I shifted my stance, planting my boots into the cold pavement, watching the glass doors like they were about to open onto a storm. Maybe they were. The light above the entrance flickered again, crackling softly, and the hum of the pumps seemed to fade into a dull, tense silence. The doors slid open. Royce stepped out into the night, and the look on his face told me he already knew we weren't strangers in the dark anymore. The cold hit Royce first. It always does. That sudden slap of night air that makes most people wince or tuck their chin deeper into their jacket, but not him. He stepped out like the cold belonged to him, like the darkness recognized him. His boots crunched slowly across the pavement as he scanned the lot, casual at a glance but too precise in the details, eyes cutting from pump to pump, rig to rig, shadow to shadow, and then they landed on me, on us. His steps slowed, his jaw tightened, and the faintest curl of recognition tugged at the corner of his mouth. Caleb grabbed a fistful of my sleeve, fingers digging in. "Don't let him take us," he whispered, voice barely more than a breath. I shifted my stance just enough to put myself squarely between him and the man crossing the lot. "You're staying right here," I told him. "He's not touching you." But even as I said the words, Steady, calm, unshaking. I could feel something simmering beneath Royce's stillness. Not immediate violence, something worse. A bruised sense of authority. A man whose world only made sense when he was the one closing doors, not the one locked out. He stopped a few feet in front of me, eyes flicking briefly to Caleb behind my leg, then back to me. "Evening," he said, voice rough and low, as if we were two strangers discussing weather instead of a boy he'd abandoned in the cold. I didn't answer. He waited a beat, then offered a thin, humorless smile. "Kids wander," he said with a shrug. "You know how they get." The lie slid off his tongue too easily, too practiced, too familiar. Men like him didn't lie to deceive. They lied to maintain the illusion of control. And right now, I was standing exactly where he didn't want someone like me to be. "He looked freezing," I said finally, voice steady. Didn't seem like he wandered far. Royce's eyes hardened a fraction. "We had a disagreement," he replied. "Family stuff." He shifted his stance just enough to look casual. "Not really your business." He let the words hang there, expecting them to settle, to silence me. But I'd heard those lines before in parking lots, rest stops, motels, front seats of idling cars. Family stuff is a phrase that covers a lot of sins when you think nobody's paying attention. I stepped forward just half an inch, enough to make it clear the conversation wasn't moving his direction anymore. "Where's his mother?" I asked. That wiped the thin veneer off his face. His jaw clenched. His eyes darkened just slightly. A micro-expression, but revealing. "She's resting," he said, voice tight. "She needed a minute." Caleb's breath hitched behind me, the boy shrinking into himself. Another lie. Another script. But it was the smallest detail, the way Royce avoided glancing toward the SUV, that confirmed everything I feared. "There's a woman locked inside that car," I said quietly, "and a child standing alone in the cold." Royce's nostrils flared, the first visible sign of the pressure building in him. "Watch yourself," he muttered. "You're making assumptions." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I'm listening to the kid you left outside." Something sharpened in his glare, something that didn't like being exposed. He took a small step closer. "Back off," he growled under his breath. "You don't know what you're stepping into." His posture changed just enough to tell me one thing. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about losing control, losing face, losing the people he thought belonged under his thumb. But there was something he didn't know yet. I've spent years on this road watching over the ones who can't protect themselves, and tonight, I wasn't stepping back. Royce's stare drilled into me like he was trying to calculate the exact second I'd fold. Men like him always look for that moment, when someone's gaze slips, when their shoulders ease, when they show even a flicker of doubt. But I didn't give him any of that. I stood my ground, breathing slow, steady, controlled. The neon lights above us flickered again, humming like a warning settled into the cold air. Caleb stayed close behind me, small fingers still gripping the fabric of my jacket. His presence alone was enough to remind me why backing down was never an option. Royce took one more step forward, lowering his voice until it was just above a whisper. "This is your last chance," he muttered. "Walk away." It wasn't a threat said loudly. It was quieter, more dangerous. A man convinced he still held power, even though the moment had already shifted out of his hands. I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to feel it. Then I leaned in, matching his tone, calm as a winter night. "No," I said. "I'm not leaving a kid and his mother out here with someone who thinks this is normal." His eyes narrowed. A muscle twitched along his jawline. For a moment I thought he might swing. Rage can be a fast thing, unpredictable and blinding, but something held him back. Not fear, calculation. He glanced around the lot, assessing the angles, checking if anyone else was watching. The cashier inside the store had stepped out of view. The pump island was empty except for us. His posture straightened slightly, as if he'd found a scrap of leverage. "You don't know her," he said. "You don't know what she puts me through." There it was. Another script. Another line meant to justify the unjustifiable. "I don't need to know her," I replied. "I can see enough right here." He scoffed under his breath, shaking his head. "She always plays the victim," he muttered. "Always." His gaze flicked past me again, toward the SUV, toward June, toward the one person he still believed belonged under his control. But the more he talked, the more cracks showed in his armor. His voice trembled just barely at the edges. His stance wasn't as sure, and that tremble, that shift, told me exactly how fragile the illusion of his control really was. "You locked your family out," I said quietly, "in the cold, in the middle of the night." Those words hit him, not like a punch, but like recognition, like I'd spoken the truth he'd been avoiding hearing out loud. His expression hardened, defensive walls snapping into place. "She needed to calm down," he growled. She always pushes too far. She needs to learn. Caleb whimpered softly behind me, the sound barely audible but enough to cut through the night. Royce's eyes darted to him, and there was something possessive in the way he looked at the boy. I stepped sideways just enough to block Caleb completely from his view. Royce noticed the shift, and for the first time since he walked out of that store, uncertainty flickered across his face. I could see him trying to decide what mattered more, maintaining dominance or regaining access to the SUV. He licked his lips, glancing toward the vehicle again. "Look," he said, forcing his voice to soften. "Just let me handle my family. You don't know how she gets. And you don't know how I get," I said, calm, steady, dead center in his path, especially when a kid's out here asking for help. Something in him snapped at that, not loudly, not visibly, but I saw it. The shift in his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the decision he made in the quiet between heartbeats. He turned toward the SUV, and Caleb whispered, shaken to his core, "Rowan, don't let him go to her." Royce didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He just started walking toward the SUV with that same slow, deliberate pace he'd carried out of the store, like each step was a statement, like he owned the ground he walked on. Caleb's breath hitched behind me, a small, broken sound that didn't belong to a child his age. "Please," he whispered, tugging at my jacket. "He'll yell at her. He'll scare her again." I saw the fear in his eyes, the memory of something he had no words for, and I felt my chest tighten with something fierce and immovable. I moved before Royce reached the passenger door, stepping in front of him again, cutting off his path. He stopped abruptly, inches from collision, annoyance flashing across his features like a shadow passing over glass. "Move," he said, not raising his voice, but pressing weight behind the word like it carried law. I didn't budge, not an inch. My boots were rooted to that cold pavement like they'd grown there. "Not until I see she's okay," I said, calm, controlled, but unshakable. Royce inhaled slowly, chest rising beneath his flannel, nostrils flaring at the refusal. He glanced over my shoulder, just enough to check who might be watching. A trucker walked out of the store carrying a coffee, unaware of the tension. Otherwise, the lot was quiet again, empty of spectators. Royce leaned in, lowering his voice to a gravel, low murmur. "You think you're doing something noble here?" he asked. "You're not. You're making things worse." I met his stare. "If things were fine," I said, "a little boy wouldn't be freezing outside begging for help." His jaw flexed again, this time harder. Then I heard it, barely audible through the glass of the SUV, a soft thump, then another, like someone tapping the inside of the door with the side of a fist. Caleb stiffened. "That's Mom," he whispered. Royce heard it too. He turned his head sharply toward the SUV, irritation twisting into something bordering on panic. "She needs to stop," he muttered under his breath. "She needs to stop right now." The boy beside me trembled as the tapping grew more urgent. I stepped closer to the SUV, keeping my shoulders squared toward Royce, ready for any sudden movement. The windows were fogged, but I could make out a faint blur of movement inside. A figure, shoulders hunched, hands pressed against the glass. June, still trapped, still trying to get someone's attention. "She's locked in," I said quietly. "Let her out, now." Royce exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face like he was exhausted by my persistence. "She does this," he muttered. "She works herself up. She has these episodes, and then I have to deal with it." Caleb drew in a shaky breath. "She wasn't having an episode," he whispered, his voice trembling but strong enough to carry meaning. "You yelled at her. You scared her." Royce whipped his gaze to the boy, his expression slipping into something that betrayed just a flicker of guilt, or maybe irritation at being challenged. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. That was it. I stepped directly into Royce's line of sight, blocking Caleb from view, my voice a calm, steady anchor in the cold. "This ends now," I said. "Unlock that door." Royce stared at me for a long moment, weighing his options, every muscle in his face tight. He reached slowly into his pocket. For a second I didn't know what he'd pull out. Then I saw the glint of keys in his hand. Not surrender, not willingness, just a man realizing he was out of ways to justify the unjustifiable. Royce held the keys like they weighed something, like unlocking that door meant losing whatever grip he believed he still had on the world. His fingers tightened around the metal, knuckles paling in the cold, and for a moment, he just stood there, silent, calculating. The kind of silence that pulls every sound out of the air, makes the pumps hum louder, makes the wind sound sharper, makes the night itself feel like it's waiting to see what he'll do. Caleb pressed closer to my side, clutching my jacket with a desperation that told me everything about the life he'd been living. "Give me the keys," I said quietly, my voice steady, anchored. Royce didn't look at me. He stared at the SUV, jaw tight, breath fogging in harsh bursts. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of losing control in front of the two people he'd built his identity around. You don't understand how she gets, he muttered. The words came out fractured, defensive, trembling with the pressure of a narrative falling apart. I didn't raise my voice. I don't need to understand her, I replied. I understand what I'm seeing. Something in him twitched, barely, but enough. His posture shifted in a way that told me he wasn't gearing up to fight. He was gearing up to justify. One more excuse. One more twist of the knife meant to convince himself he was the victim. She pushes me, he said, almost pleading with the air. She knows how to get under my skin. His voice wasn't hard now. It was brittle, fragile. A man standing in the ruins of a story he'd always believed was truth. Caleb's voice came from behind me, soft, shaking, but brave. You scared her, Dad. The word Dad hit the air like a stone thrown into frozen water. Sharp, loud, impossible to ignore. Royce flinched. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but his shoulders slumped the smallest fraction. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. The truth from his own son had cracked through the armor he'd been wearing all night. I stepped closer, leaving him nowhere to retreat but toward accountability. Unlock the door, I repeated, quieter now, but carrying the weight of inevitability. For a long moment, Royce stood frozen in place. His breath clouds drifted upward, disappearing into the night. His fingers loosened around the keys, metal jingling softly as they dropped lower in his hand. His eyes flicked between me, the SUV, and Caleb, each glance slower than the last, like he was realizing this night wasn't going his way no matter how he twisted it. Finally, with a shaky exhale, he muttered, "Fine." It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't responsibility. It was surrender, without grace. He stepped toward the SUV, snow crunching under his boots, his figure framed by the neon lights as he approached the passenger door. Caleb squeezed my arm, whispering, "Please stay." I nodded. "I'm right here." Royce slid the key into the lock, his hand trembling with a cocktail of anger, shame, and something he wasn't ready to name. The lock clicked loudly in the quiet night, and then, the moment the door cracked open, everything changed. June did not step out. She burst out, a blur of fear, breath, cold, and desperate energy as she stumbled into the open air, eyes red, hair disheveled, breath shaking uncontrollably. But what caught me wasn't her appearance. It was the look she gave Royce, not of fear, of recognition, of someone who had survived too many nights like this. June stumbled out of the SUV like someone emerging from underwater, gasping in cold air as if she hadn't tasted freedom in hours. Her hands clutched the doorframe for balance, knuckles white, breath trembling in sharp bursts that fogged instantly in the frigid night. Caleb darted toward her, the sound that left him a mix between a sob and a gasp. "Mom!" he cried, voice cracking. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him in a grip that looked less like a hug and more like someone holding on to the last solid thing in their world. Royce stepped back as if her sudden escape had slapped him, his face contorted, not with remorse, not with surprise, but with injured pride, the kind of expression a man wears when his version of events is slipping out of his grasp. June didn't even look at him, not once, not for a second. Her entire focus was on Caleb, her fingers shaking as she touched his face, his hair, his cold cheeks. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" she whispered, voice trembling but steady enough to reveal everything she'd been holding inside. Caleb shook his head, burying himself into her arms. "I was scared," he whispered. June closed her eyes, a single tear carving a warm path down her cold skin. "I know, baby, I know." She pulled him tighter, as if trying to shield him from the memory. Royce watched the scene unfold, jaw clenched, fists tightening at his sides. "June," he barked, voice sharp as cracking ice. "Get up. We're leaving." She didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't acknowledge him in the slightest. It was the silence of someone done apologizing, someone who finally knew she wasn't alone out here. I stepped closer, placing myself between Royce and them without second-guessing the instinct. His eyes snapped to me, dark and simmering. "Back off," he growled. "This is between me and my family." I shook my head slowly. "Not anymore." June's breath hitched at the sound of my voice. She finally looked up, really looked up, her eyes glassy, searching, scared, and relieved all at once. She didn't need to speak. The plea was already there, shimmering behind her silence. Royce took a step toward us, shoulders squared, lips curling into something meant to intimidate, but this time, something was different. June straightened, not fully, not confidently, but enough. Enough for him to see that his control wasn't absolute anymore. Enough for him to see that someone else was standing between him and the people he'd cornered for too long. The shift made him hesitate, just a fraction, but enough to break his rhythm. The store door slid open behind us. Eddie Harmon, the overnight clerk, stepped out with a phone pressed to his ear, eyes wide as he took in the scene. His voice trembled, but he spoke clearly. "Yeah, I've got them right here. Send someone quick." Royce's head whipped toward him, shock flashing through his expression. Eddie held up a shaking hand as if to warn him off. "Don't come near me, man. The sheriff's on the line." And just like that, the air changed. Royce wasn't in control anymore. Not of the situation, not of June, not of Caleb, not even of his own next move. Royce's face drained of color. Not fear, but rage forced into stillness. A quiet, dangerous kind of stillness. His eyes darted between Eddie, me, and the SUV, searching for an angle that didn't exist anymore. A man like him needs control like oxygen, and right now, someone had cracked the tank wide open. He took a single step back, shoulders rising with a long, deliberate breath. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed, almost whispering. "You people always think you're helping, but you don't understand what she's like." June tightened her hold on Caleb, shifting so she was half kneeling, half bracing him behind her. She wasn't hiding. She was protecting. Her eyes burned, not with fear, but with exhaustion. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here," she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. Royce turned toward her, something dark flashing behind his eyes. "June," he said. The name stretched thin, power drained out of it. "Come here, we can talk." She shook her head slowly. "No, not tonight. Not ever like this again." Royce moved. Just a small step, but the kind that hinted at something reckless sparking behind his ribs. I stepped forward instantly, intercepting the path he hadn't even taken yet. His glare snapped to me. "Move," he growled. "I'm not dealing with you." I held my ground. "You don't get to choose who you deal with anymore," I said. "Not after tonight," he scoffed, breath fogging out in an angry burst. "And who the hell are you?" he spat. "Some trucker who thinks he's a hero?" The question hung in the cold long enough for the hum of the pumps to fill the silence. "I'm the guy who stopped," I said simply. "That's enough." Something in Royce's expression wavered. Just a flicker, the brief shake of a facade cracking under weight it couldn't hold anymore. Before he could speak, the distant sound of engines approached. 2 sets of headlights slicing through the dark, bouncing off the glass of the convenience store. Caleb tensed. June took a sharp breath. Royce's posture stiffened, like a man realizing that the clock had run out faster than he'd planned. The vehicles rolled into the lot, crunching over loose gravel. The red and blue lights flickered to life a beat later, washing the pumps and the cold pavement in color. Eddie lowered his phone as the sheriff's cruiser and a deputy's truck came to a stop. Royce muttered under his breath, damn it," as if the world had personally betrayed him. Sheriff Nolan Gray stepped out, broad-chested, calm-eyed, the kind of man whose presence brings gravity with it. His boots hit the pavement with a sound that quieted even the wind. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady, carrying across the lot. Eddie pointed at Royce before anyone else could speak. "That's the guy," he said, forcing confidence into his shaking voice. "He locked the lady in the car, kid too." Royce spun toward him. "You don't know anything," he barked, voice cracking. Sheriff Gray held up a hand, instantly commanding silence. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to need you to step back." Royce didn't step back. He stepped forward, slow, intentional, dangerous. Caleb whimpered. June flinched, and I moved before anyone else could. I stepped between Royce and the sheriff before instinct could second-guess itself. The cold pavement bit through my boots, my breath fogging hard in the frigid air as I planted myself like a wall he couldn't push through. Royce froze mid-stride, taken off guard that anyone would stand that close, that firm, that unshaken. Sheriff Gray moved in beside me a heartbeat later, his presence solid and immovable. "Sir," the sheriff warned, his tone low as gravel, "don't make this worse than it already is." But Royce wasn't hearing anyone anymore. His mind had narrowed into a single tunnel of fury and desperation, the kind a man reaches when he realizes the story he's been writing in his head is about to be replaced by the truth. June pulled Caleb tight against her, one hand gripping the back of his jacket like she could anchor the boy to the earth itself. Her breath trembled, but her gaze didn't waver. Not from me, not from Royce, not from the reality unfolding in front of her. Caleb buried his face into her shoulder, small hands clinging like he finally felt safe enough to hold on. I caught June's eyes for just a second. There was fear in them, yes, but there was something else too. Relief, gratitude, a kind of broken strength finally getting room to breathe. Royce's breathing grew harsher, faster, fog bursting from his lips as he looked between us all. The sheriff, me, June, Caleb, the other deputy now approaching from behind. "You don't understand," he muttered, voice shaking. "She makes me crazy. She pushes and pushes." Sheriff Gray cut him off sharply. "That's enough." The words struck like a hammer. Royce blinked, stunned by the authority slicing through his excuses. For the first time all night, he looked small, not physically, but in the way a man looks when the world finally refuses to play along with his narrative. Sheriff Gray stepped forward, hand on his cuffs. "Turn around," he ordered. Royce flinched like the words burned. No, he hissed, backing away a step, shaking his head. No, you don't get it, you don't. His voice cracked mid-sentence. His chest heaved. He looked like a storm trapped in skin. And then, he ran out of road. Sheriff Gray didn't raise his voice again, didn't threaten, didn't push. He simply said, Royce Halden, you're done. And something inside Royce broke. Not dramatically, not loudly. It just folded. He turned slowly, face sagging with exhaustion rather than resistance, and placed his hands behind his back. The click of the cuffs was soft, but it echoed across the cold night like the first breath after suffocation. Royce's shoulders slumped as Sheriff Gray guided him toward the cruiser. June watched him go with an expression I'll never forget. Not relief, not triumph, but release. The release of a woman who had been holding her breath for years. Caleb peeked up at her, eyes wide and searching. She cupped his face gently. We're okay, she whispered. We're okay now. He nodded, lips trembling, and wrapped his arms around her again. I stepped toward them slowly. June met my eyes, blinking hard as though trying not to let tears spill. Thank you, she whispered, voice thin but real. I didn't know if anyone would stop. I shrugged gently, though the weight of the moment settled heavy and warm in my chest. Out here, I said quietly. Nobody should ever be left alone in the cold. June exhaled shakily, almost a sob, almost a laugh. Caleb let go of her for just a second, just long enough to step closer and wrap his arms around me in the smallest, tightest, most grateful hug I've ever felt. I placed a hand on his back, steadying him in the cold. You're safe now, I murmured, both of you. As the cruiser pulled away, red and blue lights fading into the winter dark, the truck stop fell into a softer silence, a gentler one, the kind that means a storm has passed. June guided Caleb toward the store to warm up, and I stood there by the pumps, breath steaming in the quiet, thinking about how many nights on this road carry stories nobody ever sees, stories people drive past, stories hidden under neon lights and humming engines. Maybe that's why I tell mine, so the unseen moments get a chance to matter. And if this one stayed with you, if you felt that cold, that fear, that hope, then don't leave without hitting that like button. Not for me, for the people like June and Caleb who need someone to notice the signs. Subscribe if you want to ride with me again, because out here on the open road, there's always another story waiting under the next flickering light. And as long as I'm behind the wheel, I'll be there when someone calls for help in the dark, always.